Good afternoon everyone and welcome to another video about the stories of the Titanic, where I share with you stories and topics from the Titanic disaster as well as the history of the White Star Line and other vessels throughout maritime history. In this story of the Titanic, I'm going to debunk one of the most discussed myths about the RMS Titanic. Was the Titanic badly built? Could that be the reason why she sank on that fateful night of April 14, 1912? Why did so many people lose their lives on the night the Titanic sank? In this video, I am here to answer both of those questions about the disaster and why so few lifeboats were on board the Titanic during her tragic maiden voyage. The myth about that question is that because the Titanic hull was too weak to withstand the iceberg when the Titanic hit it on 11:40 p.m. on the night of April 14, 1912. Well, the truth about that myth was that the weak steel theory is not true. Back in 1912, ships like the Titanic was built by iron steel plating with iron rivets to put the steel plating together. It took over 3 million rivets to build the Titanic, but it wasn't just her, it was also used on her elder sister, the RMS Olympic. Before the Titanic, the White Star Line had the most famous fleet of ships known as the Big Four in the 1900s: the RMS Baltic, the RMS Celtic, the RMS Cedric, and the RMS Adriatic. However, in 1907, the White Star Line rival, the Cunard Line, had built bigger ships to compete with the Big Four from the White Star Line, the RMS Lusitania and the RMS Mauretania in 1906. This brought huge competition to the White Star Line. In 1909, Thomas Andrews and the owner of the White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay, decided to build bigger and the most luxurious ships that would compete with the Lusitania and the Mauretania in the Cunard Line. And that's when the Olympic class was born. J. Bruce Ismay decided to build bigger and the most luxurious ships that would compete with the Lusitania and the Mauretania in the Cunard Line. And that's when the Olympic class was born. The Olympic class fleet of the White Star Line had three massive ships: the RMS Olympic, her younger sister, the RMS Titanic, and the RMS Titanic's youngest sister and the third and also the youngest ship in the Olympic class fleet, the HMHS Britannic. Unlike her two elder sisters, the HMHS Britannic was not served as a passenger liner. When she entered service, World War I took place and the Britannic served as a hospital ship throughout the rest of her career. The Titanic was not built with bad steel at all. In 1912, her steel was very strong. The Titanic back then was deemed to be the safest ship ever built. How could that be? Well, the Titanic's key safety features immediately answers that question: her watertight compartments and her watertight doors. The Titanic was built with 16 watertight compartments and 15 watertight bulkheads. Her watertight compartments and her watertight bulkheads was one of the Titanic crucial safety features that were built inside the ship. How many watertight compartments can the Titanic lose and not founder? In the back or aft sections of the ship and her midships section, the Titanic could survive if only 2 of her watertight compartments were open to the sea and flooded. Maybe 3, but 3 watertight compartments near the Titanic's stern section would really be pushing it when it comes to keep the Titanic alive. However, the best part of the Titanic to suffer damage due to a collision would be her bow section. In the front of the Titanic could survive her first 4 watertight compartments breached. Her watertight compartments did not go all the way up to the Titanic boat deck, her watertight bulkheads only stretched up to around E deck. If 4 of the Titanic's watertight compartments were flooding, the bow of the Titanic would not go down so low that the water flooding inside the ship will not spill over the watertight bulkheads and travel back and back into the vessel. The Titanic would not founder if the first 4 watertight compartments were flooding. The Titanic watertight doors also had float plates designed in case if the Titanic was involved in an incident and the officers on the bridge were not aware of it. If that compartment was breached and was flooding, the float plates designed to the compartment would lift up, closing the watertight doors automatically. Another new safety feature that was designed in the Titanic would be her 2 pumps. The Titanic had 2 different pumps, the bilge pumps and ballast pumps. If water was flooding in one of the Titanic watertight compartments, the crew could activate the bilge pumps and use it to drain the water flooding inside that compartment, keeping it dry. The pumps were located aft, so if a compartment towards the front of the Titanic was standby on water, the crew would have to travel aft to retrieve the Titanic's pumps and would have to manually open the watertight doors to bring the pumps to the front of the Titanic to drain the water flooding inside a forward compartment. One pump was located in boiler room 6. The ballast pumps were designed to keep the ship sailing at an even keel. If the Titanic was listing on one side, the bilge pumps were designed to drain the water flooding inside the compartment, and the ballast pump would correct the list and return the Titanic to an even keel. However, on the night of Sunday, April 14, 1912, something happened to the Titanic that would change everything. The Titanic struck an iceberg on her starboard side below the waterline. The force of the iceberg collision caused some of the Titanic's rivets to fail, opening up a series of small gashes along the Titanic's hull. The iceberg didn't cause a 300-foot gash. The iceberg caused a series of small gashes along the Titanic hull, and as a result of the Titanic hitting the iceberg opened up the first 6 of the Titanic's 16 watertight compartments. And with this much damage the Titanic received from the iceberg, it greatly surpassed the amount of water the Titanic can handle and not sink. With 6 of the Titanic's watertight compartments opened up to the sea, there was no hope to save the ship. The bow of the Titanic would sink down low enough for the water to spill over the top of the bulkheads. No doubt about it, the Titanic would founder. Thomas Andrews gave the Titanic about an hour up to an hour and a half to live before she sank. But due to her safety features, the Titanic lasted longer than Thomas Andrews thought that she would last. The second topic of this video debunks a myth about the Titanic's lifeboats. Many people say that the reason why so many people lost their lives on the night of April 14, 1912 when the Titanic sank is because she didn't have enough lifeboats. Although it is true that the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone on board, but what good is it to have enough lifeboats if you don't have enough time to launch them? It took the sailors on the boat deck up to an hour to launch the very first lifeboat from the Titanic on the night of the sinking. The Titanic lifeboats had a capacity of around 70 people. And Titanic only had 16 regular lifeboats and 4 collapsible boats. Collapsible lifeboats A, B, C, and D. The crew on the boat deck barely successfully launched 18 of the Titanic lifeboats. Her last 2 lifeboats couldn't be launched successfully. They had to be floated off of the Titanic because during the Titanic final moments, the ship was sinking way too fast for the sailors to launch collapsible lifeboats A and B successfully. Collapsible lifeboat A and collapsible lifeboat B was not located like the other boats were on the Titanic. They were located on the roof of the officers' quarters beside the first smokestack. Collapsible lifeboats A and B had disastrous launches during the Titanic final moments. Collapsible lifeboat A, First Officer William Murdoch had to use lifeboat oars to slide collapsible lifeboat off the roof of the officers' quarters. The boat landed on the boat deck correctly and the crew rushed to tie collapsible lifeboat A onto lifeboat number 1's davits. But the Titanic was sinking way too fast. When collapsible lifeboat A was readied, Titanic developed a strong list to port. The starboard side boat deck was still dry and was higher out of the water than the Titanic port side. That was why Murdoch and the crew thought they had more time to launch collapsible lifeboat A and tied it onto the falls, but on 2:15 a.m., the Titanic's port list went away and the ship returned to an even keel. Once she did, it created a huge wave washing over the Titanic's starboard side where Murdoch and the crew rushed to work with collapsible lifeboat A. The crew had no time to waste. The lifeboat tried to float away from the rapidly sinking Titanic, but the lifeboat was tied to the Titanic. The ship was beginning to drag collapsible lifeboat A down with it. The crew had to use knives to cut the ropes to free the lifeboat from its falls. They couldn't release collapsible lifeboat A from the davits normally, because of the strain. So they had to cut the ropes to free the lifeboat from its falls. Once the lifeboat was free from the davits, collapsible shot straight up above the water like a rocket when it became buoyant and it semi-flipped, spilling everyone on board the lifeboat into the water. Once it righted itself, people rushed back inside collapsible lifeboat A and it was partially flooded with freezing cold water. On the port side of the Titanic, collapsible lifeboat B was flipped upside down when Second Officer Charles Lightoller and his crew pushed it onto the boat deck from the roof of the officers' quarters and the lifeboat landed on junior telegraphist Harold Bride. Harold Bride was trapped underneath the overturned collapsible lifeboat B. He began to shout for help, but the officers couldn't hear them due to the panic and chaos swarming around them on the Titanic. Luckily, the Titanic sank from under collapsible lifeboat B and Harold Bride swam out from under it and climbed aboard the overturned lifeboat. Harold bride would survive the sinking in a wild way. What good is it to have enough lifeboats if you don't have enough time to launch them all? If the Titanic did have enough lifeboats for everyone, the lifeboats would be stacked on top of each other. The crew would have to remove the extra lifeboats in order to work with the ones they had during the real time. The extra lifeboats would have been destroyed during the Titanic final moments, so the crew had to work with the number of lifeboats the Titanic normally had on that night. Because of the efforts of Captain Smith, William Murdoch and the rest of the Titanic's crew, more than 700 people escaped the Titanic and survived that night. And they moved the extra ton of coal from the starboard side coal bunker to the port side coal bunker. The Titanic developed a 3-degree list to port due to the extra ton of coal the crew moved from the starboard side coal bunker. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, the water flooding inside the ship would overwhelm the extra ton of weight on the port side, returning the Titanic to an even keel. Then later the Titanic developed a starboard list. But the starboard list,